question is about sex in marriage. Okay, another one of those. I just got married. Are there things that are off limits, like BDSM and others?
I appreciate that you're asking this question because it means that you guys are probably exploring. It means that you're probably like, you know what? We're married now. We can really just explore one another's body. I would say enjoy one of the first parts of, why God created marriage, and that's for enjoyment and intimacy and
connection.
Yeah, all of those great things. So I appreciate the sentiment behind the question. BDSM, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yep.
Also not in the Bible. However, yeah, that would probably be a delicate one. I
actually don't think it's that delicate.
Okay, I was about to say I don't see a word. I'll say what I was going to say, and then you can really say what's right.
Okay, perfect.
I don't see a world where inflicting pain on each other is God's looking down and he's like, yeah, that's my design for sexuality.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
But I mean, babe, weigh in on what you were going to say.
God created sex for connection. It's to bond a man and a woman to each other,
right?
For life. And let's also think about it this way. When God created Adam, he put his image in Adam, and then he took Eve out of Adam to create Eve.
Right.
And so all of a sudden the image of God was split in two. And when a man and a woman who are married come together and have sex, that's the fullest picture of the image of God that we see physically anywhere in the world.
Jesus.
Well, yeah, Jesus, but like in us.
Truly.
Right? And so
and we would have to get deeper into Genesis if you didn't catch all of that. But what she's saying is correct. But continue with BDSM.
And so I would say that anything that you bring, Scripture says keep the marriage bed undefiled. I would say anything that degrades the image of God is going to be a hard no.
The other thing that I would say is what birthed this desire for BDSM? Because, and I'm not grossly familiar with BDSM. I don't really know what all qualifies as BDSM, what all it entails. I know it's kind of violent, can have pain infliction involved with it. But let me say this. If we dig into the roots of why BDSM is appealing to an individual, you would probably be hard-pressed not to find some sort of trauma associated with it. Like, trauma makes me feel connected to you. Probably what someone is looking for in BDSM is this level of energy and connection that they don't feel like traditional sex has to offer them. And the reality is that probably comes from some unresolved pain.
And let's also talk about when you say, where was this idea birthed? These fantasies that you're trying to play out, most likely came from porn.
That's a great point. I didn't even think about that.
Most likely,
you're right.
Most likely it came from porn. And so the goal of a sexual relationship with your husband or wife is not to emulate what you're seeing on the screen and recreate it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not it.
No, that's a very good point. A few weeks ago, we were speaking to some high schoolers, and in our research phase, one of the things that we stumbled upon was that a majority of porn is violent in nature or unnatural in nature. And so that's where you even get into scenarios beyond BDSM where it's like, hey, the sex is great, but what if we invited in a third person?
Yeah.
It's consensual, right? And you're right. All of that is probably being birthed out of, wait, I was raised on porn. And so therefore, what God created as good and fulfilling, I'm now trying to pervert that with what with what I was acclimated to seeing and being excited by in maybe my formidable years or even into my adulthood.
Yeah. So I think that we answered the last part of her question.
Okay.
Which was, is BDSM okay?
Right.
I think, we would say a hardcore no. But what she asked is, are there things that are off limits? Are there things that are in the bounds?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's a very open-ended question. So things that are off limits, extra people.
Yep.
Animals. That's biblical.
Yeah.
You know, that's in the Bible. Some people are like,
it's biblical. It is in the Bible.
Yeah,
that is
in the
not
Bible.
biblical.
Yeah.
That's not. It's morally.
Yeah.
Wow.
You shouldn't do that. I think anything that causes pain outside of the natural development of we're trying to, learn one another. What I mean by that is, okay, it can be, painful for women whenever they begin having sex, and are kind of stretching that muscle, for lack of better words. I don't know how you want to classify that, but I think everyone understands what I'm saying. So, but any pain that's inflicted intentionally, for the sake of causing another pleasure and causing one pain and one pleasure. What would you say? What do you think would be off limits in a sexual relationship and marriage?
Well, I think that there are the hardcore ones that you said that are just kind of a given.
I crush those.
I would say,
good job, D.
Pornography is off limits in marriage.
Great point. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this degrades the image of God.
Consensual sin is still sin.
Consensual sin is still sin. Like, we don't. It's not. It's not permissible to watch porn together just because you're now married.
Right. Exactly.
Or even to watch it individually, because it's something that degrades the image of God. BDSM was a hard no, and then I think so. There's the category of things that are the hard no's,
right?
And then there's the category of things that are a question of comfortability. Like, these things are a matter of comfortability, and it kind of goes back to when we discussed oral sex at the beginning of the episode,
right? Like sex toys. That's something that we haven't talked about at all. Are sex toys in marriage okay?
Right. Yeah, and so that's what I would classify sex toys, vibrators, things like that within marriage as something that is to be a conversation between a man and a wife. But then, then it becomes an entirely different situation when it's like, well,
and people have pretty strong opinions about that.
They do.
Obviously, this is like the world of conversation that we live in.
Yeah.
And I was discussing it with an outside friend, and I mentioned this, and he just immediately, he's like, no electronics in the bedroom, blah, 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 blah. I mean, just got really kind of,
dogmatic about it.
Let me know his opinion. And I'm like, okay, great. I know how he feels, but I can't biblically say that would be wrong.
We have some friends who are Christian leaders,
right,
who were recently on a podcast discussing this, and they have a different stance on it. But let me also say, they discussed their own boundaries around it. So they said, okay, this is going to be okay for us, but we're both in agreement that this doesn't happen alone.
Right.
This doesn't, like, they had their own set of boundaries that said, this is okay, this isn't. And so, I go back to, I think I actually said this in part 1 of this podcast, but I created a standard for my life really early on, where I said, if this isn't something that I could out loud discuss and not feel shame about, then it's not something I should do.
Right.
Now, if I feel very comfortable saying, oh, no, this is something that I partake in, and I could shout it from the rooftops. Like, hopefully, my parents aren't listening, but it's like,
love you, Mom.
Yeah. But then it becomes something that's totally different. And so you have to, like, keep in mind, what are you trying to broadcast, and what would you not be willing to broadcast? And if you're not willing to stand by it, then it's probably not something that you should introduce into the bedroom.
Right. So to distill the answer to this question of what is okay within marriage, I would say, number 1, sin, even if it's consensual, is not okay in the marriage bed or outside of it. And number 2, you've got to have conversation around the gray areas and be in agreement.
Yeah.
And if you're in agreement and it's not sinful, then sure, why not?
Yeah, I think that's great.